Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise this afternoon to address the crisis on our southern border and to say that we have a good opportunity with the Senate-approved National Defense Authorization Act. It is a remarkable opportunity for this body to strengthen Homeland Security by increasing border security. Mr. President, bad actors continue to exploit our porous southern border and to funnel criminals, fentanyl, and even suspected terrorists into our country. Just this week, Customs and Border Patrol released staggering figures. In this fiscal year, Border Patrol has handled nearly 3 million border encounters, Of urgent concern is the fact that more and more of those who cross our borders are terror threats. In this fiscal year, 160 migrants were found to be on the terror watch list, up from 100 in 2022. A smuggler with ties to ISIS shepherded a dozen migrants from Uzbekistan across the border. This alarming incident raises questions about terrorists gaining access to our country. It also highlights the increasing number of asylum seekers from Central Asia. Mr. President, the situation is clearly out of control. The Senate Armed Services Committee has received testimony suggesting that our adversaries see our broken border as a strategic advantage. Russia certainly does. The former Northern Command chief reports that there are more Kremlin agents in Mexico than in any other country. They're there because of the open border policies of this administration. The Chinese Communist Party is also aware of this vulnerability, constantly looking the other way as Chinese criminal elements sell fentanyl components to cartels, helping fuel our national drug crisis. President Biden refuses to act, but Congress will. The good news is that we've already taken steps to do so. This summer, the Senate passed our version of the NDAA. We did so on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, Mr. President. In my role as the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I led my colleagues as we crafted a defense bill that aligns with our current national defense needs. The bill supports our troops and enhances our warfighting capabilities. The bill also recognizes the border crisis as the national security challenge it is. And I note that more and more people in the mainstream media, on network news, on television, not just the cable shows, our newscasters are calling this what it is, a border crisis. In an impressive display of bipartisanship earlier this year, we passed our legislation with an overwhelming margin of 86 to 11. This sweeping endorsement puts the Senate in a strong negotiating position as the House and Senate reconcile the two defense bills in conference. And I certainly hope we can do that and get that to the President soon. As we move through the conference process, we must retain the border provisions we fought so hard to include. One such measure is the Finish It Act. When we say finish it, I mean the border wall. The legislation which I authored and which is in the bill would continue construction of the border wall. The previous administration purchased high-quality steel wall panels. But when President Biden took office, he chose to spend $130,000 per day to store these materials rather than using them to secure the border. The high-quality steel panels are there. Our president is spending money to store them rather than using them for the intended purpose. Taxpayers have already paid for them. That amounts to tens of millions of dollars spent to do absolutely nothing, all the while cartels continue to traffic drugs and people across our southwest border. The fact that we're spending taxpayer money to store these sections of the border wall rather than erect them is uncontested. That is admitted, and it is a fact. And it's one of the reasons senators visit the border, to find out things like this. We on the Armed Services Committee inquired about this waste. We found the administration to be hastily auctioning off panels and doing so for pennies on the dollar. This is quite obviously an effort to circumvent congressional intent. The administration sees this legislation coming. They see the overwhelming 86-11 vote, and they want to get as many of these sections of the wall auctioned off as government surplus before the legislation takes effect. In one instance, the governor sold $4.4 million worth of materials for a mere $156,000. $4.4 million worth of border wall segments sold for a mere $156,000. Again, this is uncontested. This is a fact that no one disputes. The administration is still unable to account for $255 million worth of materials. The Finish It Act, which is in the NDAA, passed by the Senate, would compel the Biden administration either to use the existing border panels or sell them to states capable of building the wall themselves. Border states grasp the severity of this crisis in ways that the president somehow ignores. Senate Republicans successfully shepherded this provision through the Democrat-led committee and secured wide bipartisan support from the Senate. Again, the bill passed by a final vote of 86-11. It's not difficult to discern why, under this administration, really every state is a border state. Just ask the mayor of New York City, which used to like to be called a sanctuary city. The mayor of New York suddenly sounds almost as concerned about the border crisis as the governor of Texas. The Finish It Act represents just the first of several border security provisions in this year's defense legislation. Other measures address the threat posed by cartels. These criminal gangs bribe law enforcement officials and terrorize the innocent. These cartels have military-grade tools, and they use them. Our bill unlocks resources that empower the Department of Defense to take the fight to these dangerous organizations. We passed a provision which would help strengthen Mexican security forces. It would establish a pilot program designed to provide top-tier U.S. military training to law enforcement in Mexico. This would enhance bilateral cooperation against threats, including cartels. Another provision, Mr. President, helps confront cartels in cyberspace, and another improves coordination between defense, intelligence, and homeland security officials. These proposals harness the full array of U.S. technological and logistical capabilities to target work we can do from our side of the border. The border crisis shows no sign of abatement. Illegal crossings continue to surge, and fentanyl's devastating effects reach into more and more American neighborhoods and into every state. What affects the border affects us all. I'm sure there'll be strong discussion as the House and Senate move to a conference. There will, of course, be disagreements, and yet I remain hopeful that the integrity of our borders can be an area of agreement. We must take this opportunity to protect the homeland. We must pass this year's National Defense Authorization Act with these hard-won border security measures. Thank you, Mr. President. And before I yield the floor, on a personal note, Mr. President, let me say that you're looking particularly good this afternoon, and I appreciate your courtesy. And I yield the floor.